And we are live. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to those who are um, here with us already. Appreciate that sort of loyalty. Um, Jack has come back from a road trip. He's fighting. He's not 100% healthy. So appreciate you showing up anyway today. I know that this is a topic that is important to a lot of people because they've experienced it. Makes people more passionate when they've actually experienced something like this. And with some of the incredibly inaccurate articles that have been printed surrounding point rays recently, and with Tess Elliot just exposing who she truly is. She used to at least try and hide it, but she's showing her true colors. Well, today is a day for people to get out some frustrations and call in and tell us some of your experiences with trying to write into the Marin Independent Journal, the Point Rays Light, other such publications, and tell us what happened for you. I have examples of my own. And Jack, I believe you have examples of your own.
I have some stuff to say. Yes. Good morning, Paula. And for people who don't know, Tess Elliot is the editor of the Point Rays Light, which is the local paper of West Marin County, which is very much in, rancher country, for lack of the more accurate description. And a lot of us have been, well, not so much me, but you, Skylar, for sure, and Ken Belay, another who's now the executive director of Turtle Island Restoration Network, have really tried to correct her when she says things that are demonstrably false or omits things, which is kind of more of what happens, in my opinion. You just say all this and you ignore all this evidence to the contrary. You just ignore it. So, and he really gets into, well, I have some more to say, but that's what I wanted to say so far. So good morning.
Good morning. I wasn't going to stop you.
I like to go back and forth with you. It's fun.
Well, this is another one where it's hard to decide exactly where to begin. I split this into, we could go at this from the examples of when an anti-ranching letter is sent in, the resistance that they put up and how hard it is to get it printed. And I also want to clarify that anything that is pro-environment or that tells the truth or presents the facts is considered anti-ranching. Now, the other side of that is that they don't do any vetting when it comes to a pro-ranching letter. And it's now it's past that. It's not just citizens writing in and not being questioned. Now, Tess, well, you know what? Now that you mention it, Ken Boulet's had to correct her over the years. So we have the person who is supposed to be responsible. We have the people who are responsible for what gets published and whether or not there's integrity behind what was published, and they are culprits. It's not just them failing or succeeding in making sure that what people want to write in is accurate or inaccurate. Now they themselves are guilty. And that, I could get more negative. I don't know why we would expect any better in this climate. I mean, this country has elected a criminal twice. And these are the people who elected that criminal, by the way.
Well, there are so many. I mean, we all have some hypocrisy. Some are particularly filled with hypocrisy. So that we have a ranch community that is supporting this, the hardworking, struggling ranch worker immigrant, undocumented, and now they're championing his cause when most of the ranching community, I would say, would be Trump voters, if not, fanboys. Certainly not going to vote for Kamala Harris for all sorts of reasons, her gender, her skin color, her education, her style. But of course, Trump is the one who's going to, start deporting the fine folks who are ranch workers, Mexican immigrants, like, my grandparents or great grandparents anyway, were immigrants to this country. The contradictions are what is it, the word rife? And the other thing I want to just, the general point is journalism, ideally, most journalists would claim they're unbiased or strive to be unbiased. And it's a slippery slope. It's a continuum, which is, I don't think any journalist is unbiased. I'm not unbiased. When I write, I mean, I like to think I'm speaking factually, not just making stuff up, but I have certain, assumptions, foundational assumptions that you said that when we write in, it's sort of taken that if we're pro-environment, we're anti-ranching. And
Right.
I get your point, and it is technically correct from the way you mean it. But I would say that because ranching, I believe, from what I've read over a decade now, destroys the environment, you could say that when I'm speaking for clean air, well, you're speaking against ranching. Well, not inherently, but because ranching pollutes the air, yes. So it's true. That's why it's tricky. As I say, it's a slippery slope of trying to say, Tess, you need to be factually correct. Well, whose facts do you accept? And I'm going to jump into one, which I'll come back to, is regenerative ranching. I was
Right.
at Hoffman's town hall on January 11th, and more than one person brought up regenerative ranching, that regenerative ranching is the answer to the climate crisis. And I was just writing about this because I see it as the reason we're in a climate crisis. So where do you come up with your facts? And I've been listening to a lot and reading a lot of Yuval Noah Harari's Nexus is his current book, and before that it was Sapiens. But he talks about information is not truth. There's more and more information in our information age, but it doesn't mean any of it's truthful. In fact, it makes it arguably harder to sift out the truth because, as he says, the truth is actually hard fought and hard to come by. If you want to write a paper that's annotated correctly, you got to, let me see, how many ranchers were kicked out in 1970, whatever. I got to go dig that up versus just throw out a number. And short stories are what move people, and those don't need to be truthful or have any facts at all.
Getting intellectual on us early, Jack. We've lost Trumpsters already just from their inability to follow.
That's because I'm very educated. Oh boy, I'm the opposite of an intellectual. I'm intelligent, maybe. Is my name, Gescheit. That's about it.
I can go back to 2019, my first experience with Tess Elliot, when they did a piece that tried to defend the ranchers from the film. And they had quotes from Kevin Lunny, etc., in there. And it's interesting how, they made it sound like my film was unfair and it should have represented the ranchers. And in this Point Reyes piece, all the way back then, it said Mr. Thomas admitted that he hadn't spoken to ranchers. Well, what they left out is that I attempted to, and they chose not to provide their side of the story. So that's probably the more important detail that gets left out. Another part of it was stating that the ranchers weren't there represented at the event. Well, they were invited, and they were invited despite the fact that they ripped down the signs in town promoting the event and threatened the dance palace, saying that if you show the film, we're going to boycott you. Tess Elliot told me, are you sure you want to include that? And it's like, well, it's true. But it's funny that and then they went so far as to pretend that they were afraid of hostile action, and that's why they weren't there. In the middle of ranching country, where everyone's afraid to speak their minds about what's taking place there, they have the nerve, after threatening the dance palace and ripping down signs, to pretend that they were going to be the victims. And I did write back, and I said, nothing in the film is fake. If you don't like how your ranches were depicted with my camera, then you don't like reality. And the crazy thing is that I was only scratching the surface back then. The reality of the ranches there only gets worse as you dig deeper into it.
Paula writes in the chat, hi, Paula, good morning. I grew up thinking that journalism had integrity. As far as I'm concerned, journalism died about 8 years ago. Sadly, many people still regard it as news. Marin, meaning Marin County, is a terrible example of this. And, sure, I don't disagree. I'm being easy about this, but, or it's a matter of degree. There's always been rags. And I mean, I grew up in New York City, and there was the New York Times, which gave some headline, and then the New York Post version of it was shorter, punchier, and usually a little less accurate, sometimes a lot less accurate, or just brutal. But as with Tess Elliot, anyone else, I keep making these vague statements. I'm sorry, but it's, what's the total truth? And the other example I use, again, intellectual, sorry, Jim Cota, who is a retired Park Service attorney, 80 years old, really smart, helpful guy. We become friends across kind of our cultural divide, if you will. He's a trained lawyer, so he tends to speak in longer sentences with much more factual information at his fingertips on things he knows a lot about, specifically, Point Reyes Seashore and the cattle industry and the history of the creation of the park. And I'm an ad guy. I'm always trying to take whatever he tells me, which is great information, and boil it down to a soundbite that I can get on TV. And those are just two different realms. And whenever I truncate what he says, I'll say, so is this right, Jim? Can I say that most of the ranchers got 25 years when they were supposed to leave and paid through the 1960s and 70s, supposed to be out by 87? He can't just say yes, because technically that's not accurate, because there's so many little details that are omitted from that. So when you shorten to communicate a story, I'm trying to write an editorial right now that's 700 words, and I'm struggling to get it under 800, let alone go to 1,200 or 1,500, because I want to keep adding more detail to make it more accurate and a better piece of writing. But, and of course, letters to the editor for Tess actually, Tess doesn't limit them, but the Marin Independent Journal, I think, is 250 word limit. What the hell can I say that's new and different in 250 words?
I know what you mean. That's.
Because you realize, again, I am trained to think about the audience I'm speaking to right now, mostly friendlies, as I'll call them, or I'm giving a talk with Jim in front of the Marin Coalition next month, which I'm really excited about. And I kind of know the audience, so I'm writing for that audience who, they like animals and they also like their meat and dairy, like that. How do you deal with that contradiction in 10 minutes? And I'll have 10 minutes to speak, not 250 words, which is great. But there's just such, it's not even resistance. It's just everyone is culturally conditioned to an extent. And Tess is just more, God help us, upfront about, well, I live in this community and I'm going to speak for them. It's like, okay, Tess, but then to what extent are you beholden to the truth if your community is spewing falsehoods or things that aren't demonstrably true, and you won't let us get in opposition? Why not just call yourself an editorial publication and not news?
And I'm looking right now, and I've pointed this out in the past, and they didn't appreciate that I pointed it out, but 3 of the 4 ads on their page are animal agriculture. It's or maybe some people don't want to include mollusks in there, but that is part of the animal kingdom. Sorry, the humans created this taxonomy, so you're gonna have to accept it. But then you also have Toby's Feed Barn, and you have the Palace Market, again with a picture of a cow on it. And you touched on the we love our animals. This was included in my very first example, Mr. Lunny saying ranchers out here care deeply about their animals and its home. And you care that they're alive until they're big enough to be killed. And that's about where it ends.
It's such a tough one, Skylar. I struggle with this in ways you don't know. Lee and I talk about this all the time, and what words to use and how to reach people and to what audience. But there was a young woman at the dance palace. It was fascinating, just beyond politics, really, and beyond environmentalism, beyond Point Reyes. I'm just fascinated by people and humanity and how we're wired. Now I'm going deep intellectual, which is, she was, I don't know, 28, 32, something like that. And she was just passionately saying, you know, I work with these ranch workers, and they, the community, we love these cows. We take care of them. I mean, I pride myself in being able to look at her objectively and say, I really believe that she believes it. Right. And it's temple rubbing. It's like, and it was not the forum. There was no way to say, can I ask you a few follow-up questions about that? I'll take you at your word, young lady, that you love animals. Do you artificially impregnate them? Do you take the baby away? Does the baby get any of the cow's milk from the mother? At what age is the mother killed and sent to slaughter? Do you accept that it's done for profit and you have to take all the milk or you can't make money? Is that not cruel? But, you know, when she's really yelling and angry and in her emotion, and there's a whole crowd kind of like halfway to an angry mob, it's like, can't wade into that. There's no way you're going to, two people yelling at each other toe to toe are not going to ever hear each other. But she believed it. So was she making it up? I don't know, but my sense was she really believed it. That's how strong our cultural conditioning is, or brainwashing, if you want to call it that. But I have my own brainwashing, which I had to undo to become a vegan.
Yeah. So, and you and I can both relate to probably saying something almost as stupid as what you heard at the dance palace. But you got to wonder when people, it's like the people that drive around with conservative radio blasting as if they're at a rock concert. And it's like, are you trying to make sure that reason doesn't seep into your brain? Like, and that person at the dance palace, are you yelling because somewhere deep inside you're scared that a hint of the truth is starting to show up? And I want to finish quoting Kevin Lunny, because boy, is he provided, he's a fucking loudmouth over the years. We want the public to look out over our pastures and say, oh, it's beautiful. But you're not going to get that from certain people who just want you gone. I'll tell you, the only people who will say that, Kevin Lunny, are the delusional people who don't go out there and take you at your word, because your pastures are invasive, thistle infested dirt and poop collections, void of native life. It's not beautiful. It is the picture of fighting against nature for personal profit. And he earlier in this article says, they are patting each other on the back about a good point they made without any counterpoints. I actually did provide the counterpoints that the ranchers provide. The problem is that they're all based on emotion. If you don't jump into the, well, you know, they've been doing it for so long, you need to sympathize with them. Oh, their grandfathers did it. Oh, we've lived here for this amount of time, therefore no change can be expected of us. I mean, these are very, very immature excuses to continue doing the wrong thing. And I provided one of their number one counter arguments, the fact that it's considered historic. It's historically bad.
Well, also, you know, how far back do you go to measure history? I mean, you know all this stuff,
exactly.
But I'll repeat it for this show because it's good to have, you know, each block contained. So, again, I think I said this 2 weeks ago on a show, but regardless, at the town hall, 2 Native Americans spoke about their claims to the land. Teresa Harlan and I can picture his face. Really warm-hearted guy in his probably late 40s. Another Native American, Marin Tribal Council gentleman, Dean Hoagland. Got it, Dean Hoagland. I've spoken to him briefly, but I don't know him real well. Every time he speaks, I'm just impressed with his tenor as well as his content. But they spoke, and then later on, you know, people in the ranch community talked just what you said, which is we've been here for whatever, 3 generations, 4 generations, maybe as many as 6 generations, whether that's true or not. Let's say, you know, Europeans ranching goes back 150, 175 years. Fine, grant you that. Well, they were in the room saying, you know, we've lived here all our life, and Kevin Lunny was doing the, you know, the genuine tears about his father. Or Dave Evans was the other rancher that spoke. I have to tell my 90-something-year-old father that we have to leave our home and leave our land. And I mean, it was genuine. It was genuine emotion. I have compassion for that. I got it. But it was just fascinating to me. I so desperately wanted to have the courage. And I thought, would anybody even listen? I mean, what's the point? And I didn't have the guts, freely, shamefully admitted, to stand up and say, hey, folks, I hear you. You feel torn from the land and you feel connected to it. Do you realize two people, Native American representatives, spoke here, and they represent not 6 generations, not 16 generations, not 60 generations, probably 600 generations on the land, or more. Do the math, thousands of years. And they were just torn off the land. There are still representatives in this room who are not getting millions of dollars to leave. And they've been silent. They don't even have a seat at the table. You're trying to get ranch workers who were moved in a few years ago to get a seat at the table. And again, not picking on ranch workers. They're just immigrant victims too, like the next round. But it was just, the disconnect was just stunning. And even what I said, if I tried to say these sentences in that room, people just would have yelled and screamed and hurled stuff at me. And it's just no penetrating the brain fog of a mob.
Facts. NC says facts don't care about your feelings. Sledge says, good morning. Good morning back to you. Welcome again. I appreciate you here every week. Such a surface concept of what it means to caring about profit. What has occurred since last week? Did I miss something? Says Susan Kirks. A lot. And before we get to the present, I'll use another example. I want to just, we can get into the details of mine, but I want to give people 2 more examples. The Point Reyes Light in 2021, along with other publications, talked about poor McClure, the oldest dairy, shutting down and closes its doors, et cetera, which of course it did not. It changed, it increased beef and reduced dairy, and yet did not even stop with the dairy. And according to, I won't say the source names, but McClure doesn't even live out there. And we're supposed to feel bad that he's leaving there. Now, here we are in 2025, and McClure is still in the process of leaving and being paid again. And how many times can a publication say shuts its doors, shuts down? It's such a sad day for this to say goodbye to this dairy when the dairy didn't leave.
Who's National Parks Princess listening in here? I'm not sure.
That's right. She had a good comment a week ago, and I said, "Who is this?" I don't know who it is still.
You don't have to identify yourself, but if you want to, we'd love to know. Curious minds.
Hey, I don't blame you for being anonymous.
Right.
The ranchers are violent people, and they live on intimidation in Point Reyes. I wish I'd had a hidden camera on me every time I struck up a conversation with a local, and I shit you not, they got going and then stopped themselves and looked over their shoulders and said, "I've said enough." I mean, it was like in the movies, Jack. These people are scared of who is going to hear them.
Well, you interviewed, I want to just be super vague, some ranch workers on one of the ranches in Point Reyes. And, you had to blot out their identity. There'll be reprisals, or they'll get fired, certainly, if they talk about how bad conditions are on the ranch. How can I miss you when you won't go away? I don't know even what that means. It's just funny. What context, I should say, it has.
I mentioned at the beginning of the show that part of the problem is that they will print anything that pro ranchers have to say without vetting them. And it really set me off one time when Joylyn McClellan or something like that, she's a descendant of the Mendozas, which, by the way, is a separate topic. People need to realize how many different ranches out there are still under the same dynasty of a family, just from names change a little bit through marriages, etc., but it's still the same family. And she just blabbered on and on and on about all, the how the ranchers worked with the seashore and the creation of the seashore. And I'm like, this is all untrue. And I wrote a counter piece, and I provided my sources and was still vetted. And it's went on for 2 weeks of me actually sending over the PDFs, showing in bold the actual quotes from the administrative history of Point Reyes, from the original legislation, telling them what pages to find it on. And it's still, oh, well, I'm going to have a conversation with you about this. So then it led to a phone call. After the phone call, oh, I'm going to have a meeting with the editors about this. I'm like, okay, so you don't want to print the truth. I mean, did you go through any of this when you print the inaccuracies that are written in to support the ranchers?
This is back to historian author Harari's point about the truth. So many examples, including the Marin Independent Journal, which I actually like probably a lot more than you do. They do print some of my stuff, so I'm biased to think they'll print some of my stuff. I have to push a little bit on certain points, but they will listen to reason. And I only think one's been flatly rejected by the editorial board. No, we won't print this, because it was just too far beyond their belief system, let's say. But often the claim is regenerative ranching, helps sequester carbon in the soil. They pretty much ignore methane, of course, because it's just, as I like to call it all the time, the clean coal of the cattle industry. It's a little bit better. It's still filthy. I mean, regenerative ranching, more land, more methane from more roughage fed to the cows. I mean, it's just so obviously absurd because you don't reduce the number of cows. In fact, they want to fix the soil by putting more cows out there. But whenever I say stuff like this in response to these claims in a letter, they're like, well, where are you getting this?
Right.
Prove it. They don't have to prove the claim that regenerative ranching, because it's an industry claim pushed out by the media, so it's more popularly accepted and heard, or because it's heard so much more often, it's accepted. And then when you challenge it as nonsense, or point to an article by George Monbiot, or it's funny, I was just asking Leah about this, looking for a good reference to cite, because I'm writing something for the Marin IJ touching on this topic, and I'm going to have to give a cite to an Oxford University study from a few years ago that was exhaustive. I mean, like 16,000 farms surveyed. Surprise, finding that, animal agriculture, which for me is a little bit broad because I prefer to focus on the larger animal, cattle, but it's a climate heater. I mean, the short version. And that is not accepted, even though, well, it's like the climate crisis. Is there a climate crisis caused by human activity or not? If you want to fight that these days, you just go on to Twitter and you find lots of information about how it's false and the earth is flat.
Yeah, and the methane thing is rife with misinformation. I started digging into that with all the crap that Albert Strauss was spewing out. And for anything that you might be able to say is a slight improvement, it comes with other problems. If you think that a methane digester isn't creating environmental problems, you're crazy. And it is. If you think that feeding cows kelp to reduce the methane emissions is a good plan when California has lost its kelp forests due to climate change, which can be linked right back to the same animals that you refuse to stop making a living using.
So you're referring, Skyward, to feeding cows, not kelp, what do they call it? Algae, blue or green algae. There's different types of algae that Albert Strauss does, the king of the king, the best of the best of dairy production, environmentally friendly. So his idea is you go into the oceans, plunder the oceans.
Right, exactly.
Process the plants there that humans could eat directly. And he said, process that, desiccate it dry, put it into grain, feed it to your cows. You're good at this. You cover this a lot in your videos at Watching Humans, but you push it through a cow, as I like to quote you, accurately or not, as the most inefficient way to raise food for human consumption. And that's the solution to reduce methane at I'll call it the tailpipe of the cow, 20-30% in most studies. He'll claim 40%, or hell, they'll claim 100% at this point, but it's just nonsense. You're not taking into account the effect of going in and industrially, I'll call it raping the ocean to feed cows on the land to then eat the cows. It's so obviously insane.
It's the disconnect of these very people who rape the planet for private profit while saying that they're connected to the planet. Like, you have a very, very specific way of considering what is important to be done on the planet. And in your minds, it's back to the manifest destiny thing, the weird misinterpretation of the Bible that God wants us to subdue the earth. It's like, oh, well, what I'm doing isn't working, so let me go F something else up in order to keep it going despite itself. And algae might be one of them, but I am quite sure that I read about kelp also. And you know what I thought? I was like, well, then they're going to counter my argument by saying, well, why don't we create kelp forests? Oh, yes, because, salmon farms and all these other farms that were created to try and counter the fact that we're depleting the ocean haven't led to other terrible environmental consequences.
And the solution is so simple.
Just stop doing the wrong thing.
Which is exactly, stop doing the wrong thing. And the wrong thing is to eat animals. We just can't do it. Too many humans anymore. We could get away with it when our population was much smaller, not 8 billion strong on Earth. It's just so freaking obvious. And to just because I'm a vulgar person who loves attention, to drive the point home about guess what point I'm trying to drive home? It's the wife abuser or the rapist who's doing what he's doing to a woman and saying, no, you don't understand. I love her.
Right.
I love her. That stopped you, didn't it?
Well, I was just trying to think about how many people want to build a wall and not listen to anything we're saying because it's just over the top hippie compassion toward animals. Don't take the feeling out of it, but look at the dairy industry and the hook things that they put in the noses of babies so that they can't reach their mom's nipples, even though God created a mother to be able to nurse her child. Or for an Albert Strauss, these like $500 masks that they put on the faces of cows to try and process some of the methane being released. It's like, just stop doing the wrong thing. You're spending even more money to continue an industry that should have never, ever survived.
Well, certainly shouldn't be industrialized in the modern age. Yeah, I was on the website of Organic Valley, which apparently is a now giant distributor and brander of dairy products, or excuse me, organic dairy products, including from Vermont as well as California. And there was these. I mean, it's really brilliant. Hats off to these monsters, because I used to work in advertising and next door to Hill and Knowlton, the giant PR firm in Park Avenue in Manhattan. And there are these videos of these, local farmers asked obviously to make videos that they send in, and then the home office at Organic Valley produces them and puts music on them. And it's just what you'd expect. 100 cows in a grassy field somewhere, not in California. It's way too lush, running around, and the family is, we love farming, and I'm going to take this business over from my dad, and we love the animals. The kids are playing with the with the pasture puppies. And it's like, oh God, I mean, it's just begging to be a Saturday Night Live. Like, now let's watch little Timmy Kehoe, as he watches his dad slaughter Elsie, his favorite calf, at age 3 because she's spent or is lame. And the kid is, be like, oh no, like, get Kimmy out of the way. That's not good for TV. It's just such a brutal industry. And again, people are malleable. So I'm sure the little kids are taught to just stifle it the way I was taught to stifle my feelings when I watched my father, as I've told the story before, put a worm on a hook and the thing is wriggling around, throw it in the water, pull out a sunfish or a bass or a perch or a pickerel and throw it in a bucket and have it slowly suffocate to death in our boat. Like, we love nature. We're out there in nature. And again, for those hippies, as you call them, we're going to complain about Native Americans, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I'm not a Native American. And it's 2025, and we were just recreationally fishing for fun, not for our meal. And I was being taught to stifle my feelings about, the natural compassion, not just hippies, but all people feel for wild animals who share this earth with us.
Well, and you did, to side with the people that are, anti-us, you did stifle those feelings as well as did I. But what I challenge people to think of, did you not have a similar experience? Because fish and mollusks or insects are probably going to be at the bottom of the list of anything that people think that you should sympathize with. But when you watch the worm as you're putting it on the hook, I know for a fact, I can still remember as a child, I'm like, well, this seems pretty messed up. Like that worm's doing everything it can not to have that hook go through his flesh. And then also, I very specifically remember we'd just run the line through the gills and leave them in the water, and the fish just laying there very, very slowly dying. I'm like, no matter what you think about the fish, that's not very nice. That can't be a very good way to die. And then people will talk about intelligence. I'm like, okay, so can we take all the dumb people, the people who score below a certain level on aptitude tests, and torture them because they're not going to experience it the way that an intelligent person would? Anyway, Jack, you've done it again. You've gotten us onto a vegan tirade.
Vegan, I don't even know what the word means. So
no, I don't either. I don't either.
So back to the media. Paula wrote something here a few minutes ago that it ties in directly with something I've prepared for us today, if you'll indulge me for a few minutes here. She writes, my history isn't what it should be, but I can't help but imagine that slaveholders, that's a kitty, gave similar arguments against change. We have always done so, et cetera, et cetera. So the San Francisco Chronicle, 3 days ago, January 25th, article by Carl Nolte, a award-winning...
That's not here.
That is a kitty cat who wants to go outside. I better do that because she's not going to let me read this. She's demanding to be let outside. But
go ahead. I'll read from Margot while you go do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to give I hope Margot will call in today. She's just one of many people with examples calling out the Point Reyes light.
Margot's a firebrand, by the way. If she ever comes on, I'm going to thank her to her face. I should call her up, and just for standing up in front of that hostile crowd on January 11th at Huffman's Town Hall, and just speaking truth to not even power, just speaking truth to insanity, and just getting yelled down, of course, because she's not allowed to speak, but they are. And it was just, I mean, I felt sorry for her, but I wasn't going to join in because it was, she wasn't in any physical danger in that room, but it was just crazy. What's so funny? So.
You coward.
Yeah, well, it's like I choose my friggin' battles, man. I mean, I'm courageous.
I hear you. I hear you.
I can be cowardly and I can be courageous. It depends on the situation. When it's a no-win situation, just to make a point, I wasn't going to do it. And she's fiery enough that she was going to. So God bless. It's as if we're different people. So the article was called, in the San Francisco Chronicle, January 25th, A Point Reyes Era to End as Ranchers Prepare to Pack Up and Leave. And it starts out, Jackie Grossi lives with her family in a rambling ranch house at the end of a narrow road in Marin County. The view out the window of the house is of rolling hills, bright green in winter. It goes on and on. It's romantic. Jackie Grossi's family, and this is to the point about plantation owners or slaveholders, family has lived in this ranch for 6 generations, but the place is older than that. It's been a cattle ranch in one form or another since 1865. We thought we were going to be here forever, she said the other afternoon. It goes on and on and on and on like this. And
the only people on the planet who've ever experienced disappointment, Jack, are the ranchers.
Yeah, exactly. And history begins and ends with them. And there's, of course, Joe Lunny, Kevin's father, has been working at a Point Reyes ranch since he was 17. He's 94 now. And the
shit.
Shadows are
I didn't realize that. They should stay.
So what I did, because I'm me, I just couldn't resist, is I took, you can't, I mean, this is long form, so I'm just going to touch on what I did and maybe I'll publish it, but I just changed the words. I changed the names, changed the county, and I left everything important I left intact. So it goes like this. Savannah Grady lives with her family in a rambling plantation at the end of a narrow road in Chatham County. The view out the window of the house is of rolling fields, bright white with cotton in summer. Over one hill is a glimpse of the slave quarters. Over another, a corner of the family's antebellum mansions. It's one of the most beautiful places you can imagine. Savannah Grady's family has lived in this plantation for 6 generations, but the place is older than that. It's been a cotton plantation in one form or another since 1765. We thought we were going to live here forever, she said the other afternoon. There's no such thing as forever in modern life. The Grady Plantation is one of a dozen small operations that lease land from the federal government in the county. Under a deal announced earlier this month, these plantations have to close down. dispose of their slaves, and leave the area forever in just 15 months. I'm almost done. The agreement is the result of a lawsuit brought by 3 environmental groups against the Southern Cotton Growers Association, arguing that cotton plantations produced agricultural pollution and caused disruption to the families of Negroes that were first brought to the South in the 1500s. I thought of you, Schuyler, because I knew you'd appreciate it and you'd make a film out of it somehow.
That's good.
The agreement, which includes a buyout of about $30 million in privately raised funds to 11 plantation families, was hailed as, quote, a big win for wildlife and public recreation by Chad Cutrona, program director for the Environmental Restoration Institute, one of 3 groups that brought the lawsuit. But the big win for the environmental groups turns out to be a disaster for the plantation families who live and work on the land. Only 2 plantations will remain. For the rest, it's the end of an era that began in 1717, blah, 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 blah. So it's exactly that. Oh, these poor families, they treat their slaves so well, they consider them members of the family, and they're being forced off the land. And where will these poor black people go? That's what the ranchers are doing with ranch hands.
Of course, the difference is that today's modern slaves are actually being given millions of dollars by the evil environmentalists to transition, far more than you can ever say that the slave owners gave them.
Right.
Were willing to give them.
So Mike, I forget Michael's last name, the representative for the Nature Conservancy, who was in that town hall meeting with Huffman while the audience was vilifying everybody left and right, everybody spraying blame around everywhere except, of course, on ranchers destroying the land, because that was not allowed. There was no credit for the fact that the only money, about $2.5 million, at least anyway, I should say, will be raised by the Nature Conservancy, the independent interloper that's ruining ranching in the park. They're the ones that are going to raise money to help the ranch hands, not the wealthy ranch owners who are getting millions themselves, but apparently not sharing it with their poor ranch workers they care so much about. I mean, the hypocrisy was just, I guess it was so jaw-dropping that Margot couldn't hold back, God bless her, and had the courage to speak to it. And I didn't, because I knew I wouldn't be able to have a platform for like 5 minutes like this. They would just be shouted down in 60 seconds as soon as they saw what I was doing.
So there's all the money. There's the $40 million from the Nature Conservancy.
Reported. We don't know the exact amount, by the way. I've confirmed that. 30 to 40 is what I've read, and we don't know for sure.
Well, Margot, if you call in, can you clarify? I'm reading another part from your letter. Walking away with $65 million in Measure A funds matched by Malt and $40 million from the Nature Conservancy. So I want to learn more about that $65 million part. Let me read a couple of quotes that she pointed out. Your bias includes no fact-checking of angry pro-rancher comments like Donald Garibaldi.
Wait, Schuyler, just give context. You're reading Margot Wixom's letter to whom about the Point Reyes issue? Just so people get context.
This is an ongoing conversation between Margot and Tess Elliot as she struggles to get her parts published. And it starts out by saying, hey, how is it that you always say you're swamped trying to fit in our letters, but you put in Judy Teichman every other week? And it's a fair point.
Ranch advocate.
Yeah. Who doesn't even live there, apparently, but gets to write in her lies from across the nation. See, I have a lot of windows open here. There's a lot of
I'm sure you do.
I'm saddened to read that you continue to allow the disparagement of activists in letters stating scorched earth environmentalists and naming Ken Boulay as having a smug and lecturing tone for reasonably stating facts and wrongly accusing him of simply gathering random signatures. Wow, is that still going on? And by the way, Ken didn't gather the signatures. He ran the algorithm on it to see just how accurate the poll was. And of course, when the poll showed that people don't want the ranchers there, the ranching community scrambled to find ways to make that poll illegitimate. But, just a scorched earth environmentalist. Like, have you people seen the ranch lands out there? It would look better if it had been scorched. That's how bad it is.
And that I learned from your original film, Shame of Point Reyes. You just run the camera along the side of the road and show, whatever it is, 6 or 8 months of the year, that the land is just all the vegetation is eaten off the land by just a few thousand cows spread over 18, 17, 16,000 acres, however you want to slice it up.
And as I always respond to you when you say that, I filmed it at the best time. That's as good as Point Reyes looks. The follow-ups show what it looks like the rest of the year. It's amazing that people like celebrate the rolling hills of green invasive plants that are there only because of the commodity industry. And it's only looks that good for maybe 2 to 3 months out of the year as the drought conditions continue. That window where you can even fool yourself that it's nice because it's green, it's getting smaller and smaller.
When I moved here from New York in 1996, I was inculcated into the Marin group think of like, look at these beautiful rolling green hills. It's like Ireland. Little did I know that, either it was coastal scrub that was destroyed, or coastal prairie that was destroyed by cattle ranching, or it was deforested to, rebuild San Francisco after the quake. And, the hillsides were just decimated, destroyed. And now most of it's 90% of it at least is European imported grasses to feed cattle. So the landscape is already destroyed, but that's, again, the nature of humans. Wherever we grow up in, that's the normal. That's the new normal you start from. And we keep saying we're going to lose nature and we're going to ruin nature and people won't know it's like we already don't know. We can't see what was there 100 or 200 or 400 years ago, how destroyed it already is, which is why our atmosphere is heating and we're killing ourselves as a species.
Dear viewers, I'm about to put in the call-in link. I'm in the mood for some callers today, Jack.
Yeah, please. Mix it up, folks. And thanks to the folks who do show up today and or regularly. Fantastic.
And, we might get a better show on this once people have time to get their examples and call in with them. But we have plenty of examples of the Point Reyes Light and the Marin Independent Journal happily printing things that aren't accurate on behalf of ranchers. We can have a separate show about how they don't want to print our side of the story.
Well, the thing that's frustrating, in my memory, pretty much only Dan Noyes of ABC TV did the job of, in my mind, what a really good journalist actually does. And, he was a senior correspondent. I guess he's not retired yet. He's in his 60s. And he would go to, let's say you, Skylar, and say, what do you think about what's going on with the elk at Point Reyes Seashore a few years ago? And then he would go to the Park Service. Well, what do you think? And then he did the thing that takes time and effort and care. He, when faced with two contradictory testimonies, decided to find out which one was true. And he looked at the water sources and found, excuse me, dying of cold, a cold, that indeed the seeps were dry. No, there was not enough water for the elk. That's why they were dying. We have established a fact. Thank you, objective journalist. That's what a really good journalist does, is Peter Byrne often does, and other people who are, they're dedicated to it. They do it because they're not in it for the money. They're doing it because they want to get to the truth, versus the shallow stuff that passes for news most times these days.
Sledge said, great shorts on YouTube. Keep it up. Thank you, Sledge. I'm glad to know that you're watching. I should put out more. Do you want to call in? Poor Jack. Appreciate Jack fighting through this, being here when he's not healthy.
Boy, I need a lifesaver. It's the only thing I have handy to wet my throat. Now, I was supposed to do a 2-hour podcast Sunday I agreed to, and I lasted about an hour and 15 and then lost my voice, which is a sign from God. Shut up, Jack.
I'm just looking at my correspondence that went on for over a week with the Marin Independent Journal. and how much evidence I provided. I mean, I basically did their job for them, and it wasn't good enough.
I'm writing a piece right now for them, and I'm curious to see whether it's accepted and what changes they want. And it's tricky because, well, here's the other intellectualist's question, because there's no easy answer to it. So, they'll want me to back up what I say. And that's fine, because I don't want anybody, me or anybody else, writing in lies. I don't want it to be a propaganda platform. So I don't entirely disagree with the notion of, well, where are you getting this information? But once you establish it reasonably, and it's an opinion column, and they can say, this is not our opinion, this is the opinion of the author, in this case, Jack Gescheit of the Tree Spirit Project, then you should print it. And how far, and of course, they're getting two different writers, Judy Teichman, let's say, saying, regenerative ranching is going to solve world peace, world hunger, and create world peace. And Jack saying it's complete nonsense, it's the clean coal, the cattle industry. They'd have to check our sources and come to say, again, it takes their time and effort. And most of the editors aren't going to take the time anymore. That's the problem too. And I'll even bend over backwards and say, to some extent, they don't have the money to spend the time to do that kind of research on the stories. And I know you'll cut them a lot less slack, and that's fair too. Like, well, that's the damn job. If you're going to take the job, do it right. And you got to decide on a set of facts. Is there a climate crisis? Is it caused by human activity? How much of that is due to cattle ranching? These are basic things which are easy to find out in a few hours if you really care and know how to access the internet, meaning reputable sites, and reputable sources that lead to actual scientific papers. And even that gets complicated because academia has got us corrupted by big business now that, pays UC Davis to run studies saying cows are the way to save the planet. More cows, please. Exactly. There's no end to what I said there and no conclusion to make. I'm sorry.
Well, I read a lot of people will be like, well, you can't, there's worse things, or they just want to look away. It's like, oh, well, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, so take a look at this and tell me how it's good. Describe to me how this is good. Describe to me how this raw sewage running into the ocean is good. Describe to me how the black smoke going into the sky from the coal plant is good. All you want to do is say, oh, the planet's gone through worse. Tell me how what you're seeing right here is good, and then tell me why you're so desperate not to be better.
How about this one? I'll make it another example, more current even, and affecting millions of people in the state we're both sitting in, California. People's penchant for meat and dairy products, beef and dairy products specifically, to some decent extent, I can't give you a number, I wouldn't pretend to, is responsible for the Los Angeles wildfires.
Yeah.
Think about that. People actually being killed and losing their homes and millions of acres. Well, the forest is going to burn over time anyway, but it's burning more and more quickly because the climate is drying, and that's because of global heating.
How many California fires were started because of PG&E's faulty power lines? And
what did
PG&E do to counter that? Spend a lot of money on a commercial.
Well, and cut down a lot more trees, which of course exacerbates the problem. But all they need to do is say they're doing something and then defend themselves in court. So, corporation's going to care the least for whatever the issue. I had a debate with some guy who was knocking on government because God knows it's not perfect, but I trust government a lot more than I trust corporations who are corrupting government, as we're now seeing out of DC. And my point is, back to individual responsibility. People stop eating meat and dairy products, just beef and dairy products. Stop it. That's accelerating the climate crisis. It's something you can do something about today and every day, repeatedly. You're contributing to the problem. And if you don't want to hear that, tough darts. That is the truth.
Sledge asks for links to the articles. Well, we're referencing decades of articles, but we're talking a lot about the point raised light. You know what? I'll throw up one link. This one says a sad day for West Marin, which of course is talking about saving Point Reyes National Seashore, heading a couple of steps toward it actually becoming the seashore it was meant to have become in the late 50s. Millions of dollars being given to people, reducing the amount of taxpayer money being bled on industries that can't sustain themselves, ending the exploitation of modern day slaves out there, reducing the amount of abuse to animals, the amount of wildlife that die because of these industries existing out there. Yeah, indeed, it's a sad day. I can't wait. I can't wait for the numbers to show how much the revenue in Marin County increases when there's even more beauty in Point Reyes National Seashore for tourists to go and see. But here, I'll put this one.
And not that we have to end, but we're coming up on an hour, another minute or so. Did I tell you that, can I mention our special guest on not next week, but the week after, Tuesday, February 11th?
What?
LC?
Oh, cool.
Laura Cunningham?
That's next Tuesday, confirmed?
No. Tuesday, February 11th, in 2 Tuesdays. Next week's guest is not yet announced.
Oh, okay.
Laura was available for the 11th, and she's the California director of the Western Watersheds Project, who is a wonderful biologist. Well, you've interviewed her a lot. Anyway, for people who don't know Laura Cunningham, definitely save the date, February 11th, our show 2 weeks from today.
Maybe just a teaser, maybe next week, the Center for Biological Diversity, but maybe not.
No, Jeff has been super busy. He's communicative with me, but he just says I'm slammed and I'm not going to commit to it. So, I mean, something might pop up at the last minute, but that guy is doing an awful lot right now for a whole bunch of reasons, along with, working for the Center for Biological Diversity, which is a full-time job in itself.
Yeah, Sledge, you're going to send me down a dark path with this quote because you have a great point. Stay strong, he says. There was a time in history, if you said the world was not flat, you went to prison. In time, those people who denied the flat earth were proven to be on the correct side. Being eventually proven to be on the correct side does not give me comfort anymore because we are out of time. The planet can take what we're doing to it anymore. I don't know what, snowing on the beaches. Now California has fires, tornadoes, and earthquakes and hail. I don't know what people need to see, especially biblical people. Like, it's describing the worship of the Antichrist and what the end times would look like. So you can call me crazy, but that's what the Bible is telling you. But I don't know why you would think that as the planet loses its forests each and every year, and we put more carbon into the atmosphere and reduce ways to counter the carbon and kill off life in the ocean. And I don't know why anyone would think that that's just going to get shrugged off. The planet can't shrug us off anymore. And I wanted to do an episode about this, about people saying, oh yeah, well, a meteor wiped out life here too. It's like, you really are taking comfort that an inanimate object that traveled across space and wiped out all life on the planet with that random collision. We're the most intelligent species, and through our abuse of the planet, we are going to equal the damage that caused. Only worse, we're slowly torturing things. We're slowly making it impossible to live here, which I think is actually worse than just bringing life to an end suddenly. I'm going to side with the meteor.
You know what? You got my vote too. Sold. Just let's rip off the Band-Aid rather than, tear it off slowly and have it bleed. Yeah. Or put the patient out of its misery, his misery, our misery.
Well, I'll do an edited video showing some examples from the ridiculous bias journalism and what we've gone through in trying to print the truth. I thought today we would get more callers because I know a lot of people wanted to or talk about this, but we didn't get any. But Jack, I appreciate that you were here despite your being under the weather.
Thanks for picking up the tab running the show. I was not of any help. I'll try to be help for the next week promotion and getting another interesting guest on for us if I can. The one good news about the Point Reyes Light is they're local, they're small. I don't know their circ numbers, but they're tiny. They're the tiniest paper you and I carp about, and they're paywalled. So fortunately, I mean, I sometimes watch all the people, God bless them, want to bang on the Point Reyes Light, but at least they're not, the New York Times or the New York Post or the LA Times or the San Francisco Chronicle with much larger numbers. So that's the good news about their ridiculously pro-cattle industry, and I would therefore say anti-environmentalist stances.
And the SF Chronicle just put out a pretty bad one. Again, not fact checking the pro rancher information. So
Wow.
it's not limited to just up there.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks everyone for tuning in. And thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Skylar, as always. Thanks, everyone. See you next Tuesday, 9 o'clock.